Um, I'm Mike Coffey, and we've got an exciting lineup today, a great panel for our conversation. And I want to thank Leah Hershey with the Chamber and Nettie Matthews for helping us get this put together. A few quick announcements. The Chamber is hosting a virtual Business After Hours next Tuesday, that's August 25th. Chris Strayer, who heads up economic development for the Chamber, is going to be making a presentation about the current economic developments that are going on around the city, the projects that they're working on to try and bring new businesses to the city, as well as what's being done to help local businesses right now for COVID and all the related issues. And then we'll take a look forward to what looks like we may see next year in 2021. Then the second half of the event is just networking in small groups online. And it's that part is, since it's virtual, it's definitely BYOB. And that's, you can register for that. It's from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock on August 25th. You can register for that on the Chamber website. I also want to promote the Four Chambers online forum that we rolled out right in the middle of COVID. So it's an opportunity for the whole community to come together, and business leaders and anyone with an interest, really, to post thoughts, questions, start conversations. And in fact, there's a discussion on there now for a follow-up conversation that I just created for a follow-up conversation where we can hear not just our panelists' stories today, but all of our attendees can share their stories about dealing with race in both society and the workplace. So please go check that out. And at the end of the presentation, we'll also put up a link to the online forum. I'm getting an error message on my sound. Does anybody else have? Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. I'm not sure why I can't hear you, but okay. So we'll see what happens here. So let me introduce myself real quick. I'm Mike Coffey. I'm the chair of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce's South Area Council. And I also own Imperative. We're a background investigation firm that delivers premium background checks with fast and friendly service. And I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves because they're really the reason we're here. So I'll start. Alice Jones, would you please tell us about yourself?
Yes, hi. I had started Adair Eyewear. That's my company. It's a it's a corporation. Hold on one second. It's a corporation that I started in 1980. So this year makes 40 years. And it started with just me by myself. And then I have grown all the way to this particular point. I was the only female in the optical industry when I came back to Fort Worth from Boston. I'm originally from Fort Worth. I was born downtown.
Oh, are you? And you went to Boston?
Yes.
The winters didn't agree with you, though.
No, it didn't. I finished there and came back and got into the optical industry.
There you go. Rachel, would you tell us about yourself and your background?
Yeah, my name is Rachel Navahar Phillips, and I am a lifelong Fort Worth resident. I kind of boomeranged. I went to school in New York for 4 years, and I came back as soon as I graduated. I work for my family's engineering firm, and we provide subsurface utility engineering and utility coordination. What that means is before construction of a project, we locate a water line, electrical, things like that, so you don't hit them during construction. And so that was started by my mother in 2012, and we've been in business for 8 years, and we have 76 people and 5 offices throughout Texas.
Great, thank you. Dante, tell us about you and Dig Construction.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you and Nettie and the Chamber for allowing me to be a part of this. We are Dante Williams. born and raised here in Fort Worth. Went off to Prairie View, graduated at Dunbar High School. Want to throw that out first. But yeah, born and raised here in Fort Worth. Got back here as soon as I could. Did contracting, started in 2018. We're a general contractor, and we do work all across the Metroplex as a GC. Thank you.
Perfect. Glenn Forbes, tell us about what's going on in your world.
Good afternoon, Mike and panelists. Glenn Forbes, I'm currently with the WhitneySmith Company after spending the past 30 plus years in the financial sector industry, in addition to a couple other stops and not-for-profits included. I'm a native of New Haven, Connecticut, and I migrated here through Atlanta and Detroit. And like Alice, I found out Michigan weather in the winter was much different than I was accustomed to. So I was willing to bear the heat versus the cold. And I've been here now since early 80s.
Yeah, I'll take 105 over 25 any day.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank y'all. And let's start by making sure we even have the terms right. When we're talking about race, that's kind of an arbitrary term. It's a social construct, and it really has, as far as I can tell, more to do with individuals' physical appearance and their family's physical appearances, and they're in that group, and but has very little to do with anything else of substance. And is that even something we agree on, or do any of our panelists see race differently?
No, I agree with that. Yes.
Which makes it seem even more insane that it's such a big part of American life, doesn't it?
Right.
I think it's socially real, like what you're saying, but just not biologically real. Because I mean, I've been kind of doing, more research, and what race means, and it's just the rules that we put on race are based on culture and not based on, biological is what, the term originally came from, which, I agree with what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. It's, and I mean, certainly there are distinct differences between a Hispanic culture and a white culture and a Black culture. But then you look at a Black culture and it's different in Fort Worth than it might be in Philadelphia or in other parts of the country. I mean, it's, and I think there's a lot of, just we see difference. And I think anytime we see difference, it gives us an opportunity to make a real big mistake in making decisions about who those people are that are different from us. Go ahead, please.
I think that when you're in a city such as New York that has a huge amount of diversity, then race is not as much of a factor because people are so much used to seeing each other. When you, a lot of different cultures, so it becomes kind of like a norm in a sense. When you're in a smaller town or a town that may have 300 people and then they may not have ever seen someone Black in their town, then race becomes another factor. It becomes more than just the color, it becomes the degree of who are you?
Sure. Well, and even in the 13th largest city in the country, right? If you live in a certain neighborhood and you're not used to seeing people who don't have the same amount of melanin in their skin as you do, regardless of your neighborhood, and whether it's a lot of melanin or low melanin, you still wonder, why are they here, right? And
right.
It's natural.
Yes.
All right, and I would just add to that, even industry-wise, right? So being in the construction industry and working for, prior to starting my own company, working for two companies, one in Dallas, one in Fort Worth, one for 10 years, one for 4, and being the only Black guy in the company. One, I was the first Black guy to ever work there, right? So I think that there are some distinct things that happen even within certain industries where it's unfamiliar territory to see a Black person walk in and be the project manager on a project in the construction industry. So I think there are some things that even, within the city and within industries are impacted by, and people have different views just on race and what you look like. So.
Yeah,
In particular, Mike, coming from originally the East Coast, I'll be honest, Texas was not first and foremost in any direction for career or otherwise. There was I guess a Eddie Murphy movie, joke, comedy stand-up many years ago where it was a line that if you're Black, don't go to Texas. And there was more to it that I couldn't necessarily be politically correct in here, but coming from the Northeast where Alice mentioned, where it was more diverse, New Haven being relatively small, but we were predominantly Black and Puerto Rican, but surrounded by other cultural neighborhoods. They were either Polish or Italian, et cetera. So we kind of blended and migrated as necessary. And then going to Atlanta for me was completely a paradigm from going from diversity to the place where, it was a gift come true in many, many ways, just from the ability to not only see color, African Americans in a very different context, economically, socially, et cetera. And then moving on to Detroit, where it's kind of a step back, closer to more of what I saw in Connecticut, but certainly a different environment where the interaction between the Anglo community, which had its distinctions relative to African Americans in Detroit. And then coming to Texas, where it's, okay, now, and I think as I was recruited, dropped into Texas on a Sunday afternoon back in '83, every fear, perception, or misperception of what it's going to be like for an African American came to rise when there's nobody walking around and no one that I saw initially. And knowing that I was being introduced in the financial world here because of the lack of color. And albeit it's almost 40 years later, for banking, African-American bankers here are still pretty much non-existent. So that's not necessarily an exciting story to have to tell, but it's the reality of it. And so from that day, though, moving forward at the financial institution, it was clear that everything was about who they saw me as or the color of Glenn versus any other expectations initially. And it was a challenge because the only other person I saw there that I could relate to was a seasoned gentleman, Gil Ralston, back then, who was able to wrap his arms around me and say, it's okay to be here. It's going to be all right, but the road won't be easy because there aren't many of us and never have been. So.
That's, I couldn't quite hear you. Somebody serious talking to them, but
their mutes are off.
Yeah, the mutes.
They need to turn their mutes on. I take them off.
Maybe Leah can go through and mute some folks for us. So, Glenn, you got into a little bit of the marketplace stuff and how race has affected you there. But can we step back, and I'd like to hear from you guys how race has more generally affected your experience as an American and just in general society. What have your experiences been as a person of color growing up in the U.S.? So in Texas or wherever else. Whoever wants to start.
Well, my experience is being that I'm from Fort Worth and then I went to college at Boston University. I was during the time period in Boston, being the first time I really left home, that I was attacked by white people. And I was actually at the Charles River, which is right at the campus of Boston University, and could not understand why I was surrounded around these people knocking me around. Fortunately, somebody came to my rescue, so that was back in 1971. So if you take someone who is a minister's daughter who's always been sheltered, and then you go off to Boston. This is the time period when Louise Day Hicks was all about, who was the superintendent of the education department in Boston, who was about segregation. There was a huge protest at that time period that I had to really look at and deal with because my degree was in education. If I fast forward going into the optical industry, I was harassed here in Fort Worth by having an optical shop and being a female, a Black female. And for 10 years, I never told anyone I owned the store. I just told people I worked there.
When you say harassed, what did that look like?
It was awful. It was actually scary because I had never experienced anything like that before. And I didn't understand what was going to go. I'm going to get to my phone to cut it off if y'all are hearing that. I'm sorry. You know, but it was really frightening to experience being surrounded around a lot of people and not understanding what was going on and why they were attacking me. And the same thing when I had to call the police here in Fort Worth and tell them I was being harassed on the phone, and they were calling me the N-word several times, and they would call about 20 times in one row. When the police came, they couldn't believe what I was saying. And then what happened was they tried to blame the doctor that I had recruited from Boston, who worked in the same building with me, that he was the one who was harassing me. I said, well, why don't you have him to come out front with me since we're on the same floor plan and watch the phone ring? And that's when they discovered that it was not him. Some kind of way the phones had been connected and that we had been harassed, you know. So that was one of my experiences. And then another one of my experiences was the doctor was approved for his SBA loan and the banks refused to give him his money. So he ended up losing his business. And he was a 4.0 doctor and he was Black. So that was our first experience in 1971 to 72. Wow. And so that's been difficult, you know, and I've had other racial issues that I've experienced as well, being in the optical industry as well. So, you know, I could write a book.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, what about you? You said you're Fort Worth homegrown. How has being Hispanic affected your life and growing up here?
So I think for me, I grew up in North Fort Worth, near Keller. And so while, you know, Hispanics are majority in Texas, I was the minority up there. I only had maybe a handful of other Hispanic friends that are people that looked like me at the time. And so, I mean, I remember going to a friend's house to go swimming, and we got out of the pool and my friend's mom said, "Oh, her back is wet." And I didn't know what that meant at the time. So I had asked my mother, you know, I said, what do they mean? Like, and they all started laughing. So I think that I found myself, I read this really good book just now and it really got to me about code switching. So I found myself that I do a lot of code switching throughout my entire life. Just to, you know, I guess assimilate myself. And so it's something that I really just read this book and so I'm really, it's just really moved me today. I just find myself having to do that, you know, constantly in different circles and just trying to assimilate to that group of people and who I am. So really what I think the best thing I did for myself was go to school in New York, where it is so diverse. And like Alice was saying, you know, seeing other people of color or just different, you know, ethnicities is just a norm there. And my roommates in college, 3 were African American, 1 was Indian, 1 was Greek. And so it was so nice just to be in a true melting pot of a living situation and be exposed to, different cultures and traditions. And even in college, I actually received a minor because I enjoyed this one professor, Broderick Bush, so much. So he taught classes on the Black experience. And I just took so many classes that I just was, I just wanted to learn. But I did come back to Fort Worth, and right out of college, I worked with an organization with children in the foster care system. And I think just professionally, the first time I experienced racism was when we had a case of children who had recently come out of a cult. And so they had never seen people of color. And the executive director of the organization I worked for, in front of the entire staff, pointed out myself and Charlotte, an African-American lady that worked with us, and said, "You guys can't work on this case because you're Black and you're Hispanic." Now, I think I was 23 years old, and that just shook me to the core because I had never been called out, I guess, just in front of people, because that decision had been made for me. And that just was really what took me aback so, harshly. But I think just, also, another thing is I'm light-skinned Hispanic. And so sometimes people assume that I'm white. Recently, I was in an Uber, and our Uber driver just started talking about how Mexicans were ruining the neighborhood. And luckily, we were very close to my house because I had to just get out right then and there, because it's insane what people, will say to you when they assume something about you.
Dante, what about your experience growing up? What was that like?
So very similar to some of what's been said by Ms. Jones and Rachel. But so being from, I lived all over and we moved a lot. So I was mainly east side, but lived some on the southwest, some on the north side as well. But definitely a few experiences. I had an older white kid called my brother nigger, and I had to deal with that. I had experiences to where in high school we were, there was a party in a affluent neighborhood in the city, and we got questioned to why we were in that neighborhood. Walking home from school, had issues, because we, like I said, we moved kind of different places. So we had, different, and when we lived in, you would say, white neighborhoods, people would question us while we were walking through that neighborhood, what was going on, cops being called, just from us simply being present. One incident, we were driving through and we got pulled over for loud music going through a neighborhood, and we didn't actually have a stereo in our car. At the time, it had got stolen a couple days before, but the reason why we got pulled over was loud music. So very similar, a lot of instances, even from, so now kind of old, I got cornrows back or braids, as some of you guys can see. But in high school, I actually had several meetings with principals and administrative staff about, and back then there was a thing that if you had braids, you were gang affiliated or kind of had some ties. That was the stereotype or the profile of young Black men with braids. But yet I was a magnet student, star football player, step team, distinguished gentleman, so many different other groups that I was involved with. And it was told to me that if I, kept this hairstyle or this lifestyle, that I couldn't be successful and that I would not be able to get hired in the corporate world because it was unprofessional. So those are things and real conversations that were had. And even now, kind of throughout my professional career, there were, so one of the particular reasons why I left the first company I was with was a great company, great guys. But the last project I was on, one of the superintendents, and in the construction industry, labor force is strong Latino, Hispanic, right, here in Texas. And the particular superintendent on this project decided to make the wetback statement and I called him out on it. Right? And then I also talked to HR, but this guy had been with the company for 30 years, had a relationship with the VP, had a relationship with different people, and pretty much was told, hey, man, just don't worry about it. Don't say anything. Just keep going, right? And then a few weeks later, the guy made another comment about his son being in the Army, and he was stationed in Japan. And he, not knowing that my great-grandmother is Japanese, right? Like a lot of people wouldn't know that. Made a comment about, well, we don't deal with those kind of people. My son better not come back with a chink, and just making some real derogatory statements. So I called him to the table again on it, and nothing was done about it. And so I decided to, at that time, remove myself from the company and the situation, only to arrive at again, great company here in Fort Worth. Was on a project up in Denton as the project manager. Upon arrival, I am the PM. I'm the guy that's kind of over the job, was viewed as not capable, not just before the job even started. And then as the job progressed, the owner's rep made some pretty derogatory remarks towards me, called me boy, told me to shut up, and borderline wanted to call me the N-word, but he, kind of stopped that boy. I went back, let the company know that I was working for at the time, what had happened, what was going on, kind of the same comments, same sentiments. Hey, turn the other cheek, just do your job. Because at that time, there were some things that, there were some more projects kind of down the line. And yeah, that kind of it didn't sit well. And this was during the time when a lot of the police shootings had really kind of started amping up around 2015, 2016, around that time. And so those things, and I had some pretty good conversations with those guys, but I think it was more of just a not understanding the level and kind of what that does, what they could do, and being the only Black person at both companies. There was just a lack of understanding of the impact and what that does mentally, and the frustration that kind of resides with some of those type of things that are being said, whether it be from the Latino side or just from me personally as a Black man. So, and there are other stories and other instances, like for instance, one project, we had a kickoff meeting and they asked, well, what's your fear from this project? Like, just in general, like, what would you fear if something happened? And I thought, so my fear is always the same on any project. Being the only Black guy on the project is something racially happened, and I have to defend that, right? Or I have to say something about it. Because anything else, me growing up and dealing with some of the things I've dealt with, it doesn't really bother me, right? So I think that's it. That's in a nutshell.
Well, you bring up an interesting point that in your business life, both as an employee and now maybe even as a GC, you had to make choices to, do I say something or do I just go along to get along because my financial interest is in, continuing the job or this contract. The rest of the panelists, have y'all had experiences along that lines where there was something that just, you had to make that kind of, choice between food on the table and or speaking up? Glenn, you're muted.
You're muted, Glenn.
My first introduction into the financial world here in Fort Worth, it was pretty evident once you get past a certain stage that you move, the big prestige thing is to move into a banker role. The leadership back then, unbeknownst to some folks, even the gentleman who I still call a friend who brought, it was real clear there was no intention of keeping someone that looks like Glenn Forbes in the commercial banking arena. I can vaguely remember I got my first portfolio on a Friday afternoon. It was a fair number of clients that were going to be assigned to me. But on that following Tuesday, I was in a meeting with my manager going back through as he was sharing that he had to change my portfolio. And after I questioned why, I quickly learned it was because clients that they had assigned me to had already gotten word that they were going to be now handled by a black banker, and they weren't having that. There was no support from the senior level within commercial banking to say, regardless of what a client may desire, unless they can be proven they can't do the job, if it's only because of who he is and his color, can buy him. That didn't happen. And ended up over time. So you mentioned making decisions between putting food on the plate or otherwise. The one thing I've probably been guilty of from a child is I'm pretty stubborn. If you tell me I can do something, I'm going to keep forging through, regardless of what direction I have to go in. I ultimately ended up changing directions within that institution and being in an area where I got an opportunity to oversee the lending activities of all my fellow bankers. Well, lo and behold, some of the same ones who were the more difficult to work with, and pretty much that was senior leadership. I often found that as clean as I was expected to how I did business professionally and portfolio-wise, there were significant gaps in how they did business. And so I found myself uniquely having to prevent the institution from making mistakes for the benefit of the same folks who chose not to allow me to be on the other side. You know, and it was clear. But again, you know, many of the things I saw back then, and I came up in the 60s era, Mike, where I was 2 doors down from the Black Panther Party. It was pretty active in our community. Yale University, surprisingly to a lot of individuals, was actively involved in ingraining themselves around the protesting and other activities back in that area. And I'm sorry, in that era. And we as youth were allowed to participate. We weren't encouraged necessarily or pulled in, nor were we being misled back then, but we were often encouraged to be strong-willed, and not allow color or prejudices to deter us from the things we'd like to do. So, and then when you get to an institution, and you know, I'm blessed to go put in my chief plug for HBCUs at Morehouse College, I saw a whole different level of African-American experience than even I was accustomed to, where I actually saw what was considered the Black elite. I mean, I was going to school with individuals that came from blue-collar families such as myself, to those whose parents were owning major corporations.
Well, I think we may have just lost Glenn.
No.
But I want to hear the rest of that story.
Businesses that I had heard of growing up, but I couldn't believe.
Glenn, we're losing you. We've lost your sound.
So I don't know where it jumped off, but I was just saying, you know, the things, you know, the Cosby shows and so forth. I actually had a former boss here in Fort Worth say, you know, that's just TV. And I said, no, it's not. There are actually African Americans who live that lifestyle of luxury and excellence. It's just that most folks have an opportunity to see it, as didn't I, until I matriculated through Atlanta and then other places traveling in and around the U.S.
And I think that's key, is having role models who've walked the same path you've walked, and can show you what success looks like. And I, you know, as a white kid growing up, I had plenty of those. But you know, sometimes you have to travel someplace if you're in a smaller group to see those. Alice or Rachel, what about your experiences with that? Have there been times, I mean, Alice, you've had your business for 40 plus years. Have there been times where you've had to make business decisions that, you know?
Yes, you know, what's really interesting, I feel like Rachel, because it's just, even though I've been in business 40 years, it's just like it just never stops. It's like we're constantly having to prove ourselves. And even when I hire people to lift them up to their best of their ability, whether there are weaknesses in me training people, because I am a school teacher by heart, I will have people to come in and they think that the people feel like they're better than me and I would have trained them, you know, and I moved back from that situation, but we deal with racism every week. I had someone that I referred them to a doctor, and the doctor's last name was L.E. And as the person walked out the door, they said to me, oh, well, then I can get my nails done by him too. That was racism.
Yeah.
And people, they know it, but they don't get it. Then when I was in high school, I would be in my science class and people would say, Alice, turn your hand over and let me see the difference between your palm of your hand and your color of your skin. I never will forget that. I mean, there are so many things that are so natural that white people say that are offensive. We just had somebody on my day off for me to come in, and my staff came in and said, you won't believe this. Somebody came in and they walked in and they looked at the staff and they said, oh, it stinks in here, and walks out the door. That to me is another racist comment. That's the second time we've had somebody to do that. We have a janitor, we have a purifier at the front door. I have a Marine wife who is here at the front. I have a student that we are training that's going to be an architect. I have another person who's been with me for over 11 years, and they think that he's white, just like what Rachel said. And this customer sat on one desk and I sat on another desk, and they assumed that he was white. And they said, and looked straight at me and said, well, we know you are going to vote for Trump, but anybody who doesn't vote for Trump and looks at me because I'm Black is not a Christian. We have had so many, I just looked as if I'm supposed to accept those kind of things, just like Dante is saying, those kind of things that are said that are extremely things that I have to swallow because there's 7 of us and I have to think about their income. And when I say 7, I'm talking about someone has a family of 5. My daughter has a son. I have to think about all of these people under my umbrella to help. Just like Dante may have a family, he has to think about feeding his family. People that are white, maybe they don't have to think about that because they have a job, you know, and that they are going to be taken care of, or either it's a good old boy situation. I was told when I opened up and had a full page, yellow page ad, I had the top optical shop in Fort Worth that had been in business for over 50 years. She called me and told me, you have no right to bump us off of the yellow pages because we have been here longer than you. You don't deserve it, you know? And so it's Every day it is something that we are reminded, or we think about that past tense and what we are going through. I feel like when we had there was a meeting that my sister invited me to downtown. And I didn't realize the people that were of color, that we were all experiencing the same thing. Because what one of the guys said, well, Alice, you've been in business 40 years. I wouldn't think that you would have any problems. But we are having problems. It's a race problem that we're dealing with. It's a race problem that we are dealing with when the woman calls the police for help and she gets tased. It is a race problem when somebody police goes to the neighborhood and shoots through the window. It is a race problem that we are dealing with. It is a race problem when Black people say that President Obama didn't help us, but they don't realize Congress stopped what he wanted to have done. It is a race problem. It is a race problem with what President Obama was saying about the everything that is going on. It's not just because he's Black. It is a race problem because he came and he became president and he was not supposed to be. It is a race problem when we talk about education and there is an elimination of what the ancestors of what white people did to us, and the books are not showing it. It is kept away from the people to know everything about the full thing about America. It is a real serious issue. And I'm glad that we are talking, because maybe some of the people that are listening that are white that might not have known that we were experiencing this because we have been quote unquote successful in a sense. I'm not 100% successful because I don't own a building. I've been paying a lease for 40 years. Why is that? Why is it that my assets are not good enough? Why is it that I don't have enough assets to become like someone else down the street?
Let me bring Rachel back in for just a second. Have you've worked for your family business, and it's what, 8 years old. So what's that been like in dealing with race issues?
I mean, for me, I think work-wise, I really haven't. I've been fortunate enough to not feel that, but I mean, I'm just shaking my head yes to exactly what Alice is saying, because it is a race issue. That I live off Allen Avenue, and I live in Fairmount. But when Tatiana Jefferson got shot, I thought, she lives on the same street as me, but just on a different side of 35. That's a race issue. I don't know if, and I don't know if the cops, we have issues even, with the cops coming to our neighborhood in Fairmount. It's insane. But I think for me, my biggest struggle really has been being Mexican enough for the Hispanic community, but then also, being, told, you're acting white, or, I don't know where my voice comes from, but a lot of people say, I sound like a Valley girl, but this is my voice. This is who I am, and this is my authentic self. I can't change that. But, that's been a real big struggle for me throughout my life. But I have been lucky to have been growing up with what I consider role models, but also like sponsors in a way, of women who have supported me, like Leah King, Doc Holliday, just so many people, Eva LeBlanc, my mother, of course, but yeah.
Well, let me ask our other panelists, so have there been times where y'all, because you're all successful, have there been times where you haven't been Black enough, or that accusation's been made towards you? What is that like? How do you respond to that in your own community? I've never been accused of not being white enough.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Mike, if
Definitely.
I could share, coming out of the financial industry, the challenge is the expectations from not only internally but externally are different. Alice brings to light Alec's story. If you're behind the desk and you see the injustices being done and within a financial arena relative to who we support or who we don't support, looking at the numbers and seeing what's the difference between one and the other, than the fact that one's Black or brown versus Anglo. So the risk factors for Anglos were extremely different. In terms of individuals, I've prided myself on carrying myself well-dressed, professional. But at the same time, because I'm not from Fort Worth, I always found myself in a different bucket though. Internally, I had to deal with not being assimilated enough to fit in with my co-workers, because some of the things that I was accustomed to doing or wanting to do, that wasn't the lifestyle they were accustomed to. So I dealt with more of the unconscious and the subtle biases. But on the flip side, the demands for folks saying, hey, we've got a Black banker. And it was real clear to a lot of folks, they were hoping that there was someone who could at least advocate for their best interests. And on many occasions, I was told that, I wasn't Black enough because I wasn't helping the Black community get the things that they so desired. But yet, they couldn't see the battles that would go on internally, dealing with the same world that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I felt their pain, but for me to try and be sensitive to all the issues and make a difference, at least where I could, was a challenge. I purposely ingrained myself into volunteerism in the community with the hopes that through that, I can find ways to sensitize the broader Fort Worth community about things that are particular or special or overlooked within the Black community. Some get it, some don't. And that hasn't changed much to the day. And even in the same vein of, though you say we were successful, I dealt with the same pains of being racially profiled by police, dealing with situations, the worst of which, when my first spouse, who's now deceased, when I took her to the major hospital here, an emergency room, a white doctor who looked at me because I was kind of frazzled getting her there, and I wasn't dressed as though I was Glenn Forbes, the banker, made a decision that I wasn't important in the emergency room over and above a young individual who he had to rush in because of a football injury. We got into a confrontation there that if not for a Latino officer who overheard what was going on and kind of stepped in to keep me calm, apparently having dealt with that, saw the injustice even there, that even my money and my situations not as important. Lo and behold, through the confrontation, my spouse then went into a coma, and that was the last time I ever got to talk to her, ever. And so at the point where she passed, it took everything I could. People, are you okay? Are you okay? My thing was trying to find my way back down to the emergency room. That was my initial inclination, because I said, I don't know what happened down there or what you may have given her in the interim of the conversation, but I was mistreated, and then look at what I had to deal with on the other side. And so regardless of where we are professionally, it's always different. I think, Mike, the last session you had, and I don't want to dominate the rest of your time, you mentioned how you commiserated over the George Floyd situation. My thing is, George Floyd is one in a number of situations that we as African American have had to, in some cases, bite our tongue about, go on day to day and figure out when are they going to get it right. There's 29 others, along with George Floyd. That could be the one, because of COVID, that everyone got to see.
Mhm.
But that's not the one that everyone got to feel that we as African American and Latinos have been watching over and over again. And as a parent of 4 boys and 2 girls collectively, I still, to this day, even though they're grown and college educated, with the except for one, I still worry about my sons on any given moment when they leave from wherever they are. I now worry about my daughters in the same vein because it's crossing lines, more impactful on women as well, in more of the harassment and domestic violence situations. But when I talk to my Anglo friends, and I don't commit that I a stadium full, but they still sometimes have difficulty understanding, Mike. When I wake up in the morning, I can't just say, have a good day. I have to say, have a good day, and then pray that they come back home. That's that many have to deal with outside of the Black and brown community, unfortunately.
You know, I had
Go
a
ahead, Michelle.
situation. I had a situation. My daughter lives right around the corner from the company, and there was a drug bust that was across the street from her house. And she is the only, from what we have counted, the only Black person in the entire neighborhood behind my company. And when the police came for the drug bust, which ended up being the woman's son who was living in the house across the street, the police targeted her as part of it. And the neighbors had to tell the police that she lives right here. She is not part of that. Again, we are dealing with, she was of color and everybody else was white, and she has a child that is multiracial. So we're dealing with a lot of things that, like Glenn says, I worry about when she gets ready to go home. I worry about my son in Seattle, like Glenn is saying, and he's 36 years old. He is a scientist. He looks very Middle Eastern. I get concerned about that. I text him all the time on that. We should not have to go through this. It is,
Dante, what were you
it
going to
is,
add?
it's awful. It's like what Dante is saying.
Dante, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I was, and so I think my experience maybe that's in terms of ever being viewed Black enough. So I never, and so exactly what Glenn said, what Ms. Jones said, I know those stories. I've heard, like, there's a lot of, especially when in terms of, you know, those of us that are deemed successful or articulate or can, you know what I'm saying, go into boardrooms and speak and present ourselves well. That's always kind of a part of the conversation. I think kind of where I've been able to fit in and with a group of guys that I grew up with has been, you know, a statement that we've always kind of made to ourselves because of our upbringing is we want to be able to go from the crack house to the White House, right? So be able to blend in and kind of fit where you need to fit and be who you need to be for the situation. But myself, I've kind of grown from that, and kind of what Rachel said earlier, just be me, right? And so kind of throughout my career, I've assimilated some, right? So I didn't grow up wearing cowboy boots, but now just about every day I got on some cowboy boots simply because of the profession. But also with that, I'm also being able to kind of just speak more of and how I normally would speak, whether it be at home or kind of just out. And when I'm in having conversations, so people can see and understand that culture and what I bring just being me, right? So there doesn't have to be a lack of intelligence or a lack of being able to get the job done because I may speak or say things a little bit different. That's just what that is, right? And so I think there is an opportunity for those who may be in leadership positions, hiring positions within certain companies, because something that Ms. Jones said that stuck out to me is that, you know, as I was with the first company I was at out of college, I was always asked, as I was there for several years, as why was I not moving up faster or more than my white counterparts? Because I was training them, I was giving them certain information. When we switched platforms from hard copies to digital, I implemented the BIM process, certain processes that we were doing, and the only answer I had was, I don't know, right? And they were like, well, you're training us, you're giving us the keys, you know, what's being said. And so at the time, during, you know, assessments or kind of just reviews, it was, well, you're too black and white as far as you don't see the gray. You need to be a little bit more assertive and going and pushing for what you want. Versus, I mean, if I got the talent, if I have the skills, then just move me up like you're moving everyone else up, right? So I think there are some things there that just as business leaders, people within whatever profession you may be in, and a lot of what everyone else has said, there's a lot more going on with Black and brown employees that's holding them back from maybe speaking up, from maybe being more assertive, because if they are too aggressive, they've been viewed as the angry black man or black woman, and they're too strong, and they need, you know, so those things are constantly going through the heads of definitely your black employees, and I'm pretty sure the same is for the Latinx community. So I think those things are huge, and so I think it is a race issue, but I also believe it's a heart issue and a proximity issue of really getting to know the individuals and building real relationships with people. Because I think once, for me personally, I'll make an I statement, is that once I began to have, so when all the shootings started happening, like I said, 2015, 2016, one of the VP of the companies, he reached out to me as the only black guy, right? Hey, man, I need to have some conversations. We need to talk. I've been having these conversations at my church. You're the only black guy I know. I need to talk. And so we were able to sit down and have some real dialogue about, you know, the system, police issues within the black community. Why is it happening? What things are going on? And even though he could never fully grasp the systemic issues, I think he was able to open up and listen to some of the other issues that were going on surrounding those concerns. And I think that's a huge thing for a lot of businesses, is those that are making the decision makers really have to open up and view the black and brown communities as equal and provide equity to positions within the businesses and kind of just throughout. And Ms. Jones, you definitely should get you a building, sir. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, thank you.
Someone who will help you build it too.
Hopefully contract.
Well, that is
Yes.
all of our time, and we've gotten through a fraction of the things that I'd hoped to cover. So there's already conversation about doing a part 2 of this conversation, and I'm hoping you guys will agree to that. But to follow up on the last thing that Dante said, I think those kind of conversations like this and like the conversations with folks one-on-one are the things that are going to make a real difference.
I agree. I think we have to have these conversations, and not everything that we hear is going to be palatable, but we just have to open our ears and minds and, you know, hear each other's stories.
And we don't even have to all agree on what the solutions are or even the validity of it, because, you know, that's, you know, until we start talking, we won't even be able to evaluate and understand. So,
And Mike,
Thank you for opening the dialogue.
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys. And so I just want to real quick, there's going to be on your screen in just a second, there's going to be I think a QR code that you can take a snapshot of, and it'll take you to the online forum for the Chamber of Commerce. And there is a post out there under the general section of the forum where I do invite everyone, and I'm talking to the white folks in the audience too. Tell us what your stories are about your conversations about race and experiences of race. and let's have that conversation. And then, and again, just one last announcement. Don't forget that next week, Chris Strayer, who runs economic development for the chamber, is having online after hours presentation around economic development stuff in Fort Worth and what the chamber and the city are doing to help small businesses. So thank you all again. I hope that screen will show up here in a second if you haven't seen it already. But thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll get to meet some of the people that we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, eventually we'll get to go in person to places and have actual meetings.
Yeah.
But thank you guys. That was really, really.
And Mike, maybe the overriding theme is, I know folks, if they're uncomfortable, it's okay to be uncomfortable because we're that way pretty much every day. So.
Yes.
And
That's
from these
right,
conversations, I think that's the biggest thing I'm taking away from the conversations I've had so far around this is, sure, I've always been aware of the injustices, but I've never really thought about just how, I've mentored people over the years, entrepreneurs and employees and stuff, and always tried to give fair and, even feedback. And I've received it over the years from my mentors and supervisors and stuff. But I've never been in a position where I had to question almost every piece of advice or mentoring that I get, where I will have to wonder, is this legit? Or is this something that's coming because of somebody's perception of me because of, my phenotypic traits? And so that's the biggest thing that's really affected, I've taken away from these. It's just what that, I can't imagine what that, that constant self-doubt and questioning of, is this thing valuable or is it not valuable, and where's it coming from? So
Yeah, it's very valuable. Very.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, everybody. Again, thank everybody for joining, and watch for more information coming up. And I'll talk to my panelists here soon. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.